Hello, everyone, and welcome to module number 5. In the previous weeks, we've talked about internal validity, and today we're going to be talking about generalizability, or what we might be referring to as external validity. And then we're going to talk about rethinking some of the meaning of our statistical results that we come up with. So here's an outline for today. There's going to be 2 brief lectures, one about making generalizations to the population, and the other is going to be about rethinking our statistical results that we get. So we're going to talk about in that lecture where P.05 comes from, where that what that criterion comes from, and practical significance. So we're going to learn about effect sizes. So let's go ahead and jump into lecture number 1. So one important goal that we have in science is being able to generalize from our sample statistics to a greater population. So essentially what we're doing and when we generalize is we take our sample statistics, and it allows us to infer information about this population. But remember, we don't actually have access to the entire population. This is one property of statistical analyses, inferential statistical analyses, that allows us to do things like predict the election results of a particular state when only, say, 10% of the state is reporting. So you might notice on election night that there'll be some states that are being called for a particular candidate in this upcoming 2020 election. And you might wonder, how can they do that? Well, it's because we can make inferences about the population, which would be the entire state, with just a small subset statistics from that state. Although I will say this election is going to be a little bit more challenging. It might look like one candidate is winning on election night, but because of the pandemic that we're in right now and the mail-in voting that we're going to be doing, we're probably going to be seeing some states change because, as it turns out, it looks like there's probably going to be some voting done by mail that's actually explained by party lines. So that's going to make for a very interesting election coming up. Please, friends, get out and vote. But we essentially, what I'm trying to say is that we can generalize from a small subset of the population using sample statistics. So that's what generalization is all about. But what can we generalize to? One thing that we can generalize to are people, or to I guess to animals, non-human animals. Oh, I didn't mean for everything to come up there. And there's a couple reasons for this. One, we could have a representative sample, so we can collect a sample of folks who match the demographics of the population. So for example, if we wanted to generalize to CSUSM students, we actually have demographic information on CSUSM students, and we could recruit a sample that matches those demographics from the student population. Or you could use what we call a random sample, where you pull people from the population at random. Everyone from the population has an equal chance of getting into the study. So if you've ever participated in HPP studies, that's not random sampling, unless, of course, you're saying that the population is psychology students and CHAD students. Another thing that we can generalize to are contexts. So one context that we can generalize, or excuse me, one way that we can generalize to a context is by using field studies. So when we conduct field studies, these studies happen in a natural environment, and so we can start to assume that the results generalize to a particular context. So, for example, if you collect data in the Walmart parking lot, and you're looking at whether or not people return their carts, you can generalize to that particular context. We can also generalize to contexts in the lab. And the way that we do this is through high experimental and mundane realism. Remember from our lecture on experimental manipulations, these refer to the extent that the experimental manipulation is impactful. So that would be experimental realism. So it's really impactful, it affects you strongly. And or mundane, in which it matches what is typically going on in the real world. So doing so can allow us to generalize more broadly to context. But we have some issues with this. Science has a problem, and it's because we're a little bit weird. No, not this weird science. Uh, Technically, this weird science. It's Beverly Hills 90210 cast right there. So the problem with the weird science that we're doing is that it doesn't allow us to generalize to greater populations. But it helps to know what we mean when we say weird. Weird is actually an acronym, and it stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic. Many of the participants in our studies are from nations or communities or cultures in which they fall into one or multiple or even all of these categories, and so we're not able to generalize to broader categories in different cultures or in different nations or um, outside of a particular racial category or an ethnic category. And this is really problematic. If the goal of psychology is to be able to study the human species and our behavior, we're really doing a disservice to our the folks who read our research and make and interpret it and make inferences based off of it. So this is one limit to our generalizability. So go ahead and look at this and just in your mind, pick out which line you think is shorter. Many of you have probably seen this illusion before, and it's an illusion because both of these lines are actually the same length. But many folks in Western cultures will say that this line is longer. And when I look at it, it actually appears longer. This is called the Muller-Lyer illusion. And the Muller-Lyer illusion, you might think, is is actually something that is culturally universal across many different cultures. But this is an illusion that is actually more prominent, like I mentioned, in Western cultures, in which folks see this line as being longer. In Eastern cultures and in foraging cultures, these two lines are not seen as different. So, for example, if you're in Evanston, Illinois, or in other Western cultures like Europe, folks will see the bottom line as being longer. But as we move to other cultures that are not Westernized, we see that there's really no evidence of this. Folks actually see the two lines as being the same length. So this is one problem that we see in cognitive psychology, in which we are not able to really make a universal statement about humans. Here's another example, and I want to just prime you here that this is somewhat of an uncomfortable example because it's very unconventional. It talks about an uncomfortable relationship. So if you're not up for seeing this, basically I'm going to be showing folks a reason why studying college students is not really good for generalizing, even among other folks in the United States. Okay, so if you're not up for watching this, you might want to skip a few minutes ahead. But I just want to show it because it's a common manipulation that's used in moral psychology. Okay, so here we go. Julie and Mark, who are sister and brother, are traveling together in France, and they are both on summer vacation from college. One night they are staying alone in a cabin near the beach, kind of like this one here. And they decide that it would be interesting and fun if they tried making love. At the very least, it would be a new experience for each of them. Julie is already taking birth control, but Mark uses a condom to be safe. They both enjoy it, but decide not to do it again. They keep that night as a special secret between them, which makes them feel even closer to each other. So, what do you think about this? Okay. So, in a study done by Jonathan Haidt, he believed that our morality is driven by disgust. Things that are disgusting to us drive our moral decisions. And his research has found that people who identify as politically liberal, they are disgusted by things that harm others and that are unfair. People who are politically conservative are driven by that too, but they're also driven by violations of heeding to authority, um, uh, also issues of purity. So if there is something with contamination on it, that is more disgusting for people who are politically conservative. And these drive the political decisions that we make. But in initial studies where he was piloting these manipulations, he initially piloted them among 30 college students and found that students really had a hard time explaining why this was wrong, and they would try to rationalize it. Okay, so they would try to come up with good reasons why this was wrong. Um, but it turns out that the rest of the American population doesn't do this. They don't try to rationalize why it's wrong. So when Jonathan Haidt went to survey people at a Charlottesville, Virginia McDonald's, he was at the University of Virginia, which is in Charlottesville, so that's where the college students were from. But when he surveyed local folks, they were met with a much different response. They did not try to rationalize why this was wrong. They were met with responses like this here, like, "What is wrong with you? Why are you asking me this? Are you kidding me?" Um, so this led him to believe that we have some differences in how college students and how the rest of the population in the United States responds to various psychological manipulations. And we actually have quite a bit of research on this. This is from one of your readings this week by Sears. And much of psychology research is done on college sophomores who are taking introductory courses to psychology. So here are some of the issues with college students. College students are compliant. If you can think back to your social psychology lectures on attitude change, you will probably remember the Fessinger and Carl Smith 1959 study on cognitive dissonance, in which folks turned pegs for several dozens of minutes, just turning pegs. And folks at the end of the study were willing to do it and even go as far to tell somebody that this was fun. And depending on how much money they were given to say it was fun, they actually believed it. College students are also apt to change their attitudes. You can think back to the research on the elaboration likelihood model by Petty and Cacioppo in the 1980s that we've talked about in our social psychology lectures. And they figured out that people are less likely to elaborate on arguments under several conditions. Turns out college students are more susceptible to this. So if I bring an expert into the room and tell you to focus on the content of the argument, you're going to be less likely to do that simply because you're hearing from an expert. They don't base their perceptions off of introspection. What do I mean by this? Well, think back to the Nisbet and Wilson study from 1977, where they put a bunch of nightgowns on a table, and they asked people to pick their favorite nightgowns. And the most of the time, people pick the items on the far left. This is called the serial position effect. but folks were really willing to rationalize their decisions. And they'd say, well, I like this one because of the color or because of the sequins on it. But when making the decision, folks just tend to prefer the thing that they see first, and human perception, at least in this culture, is biased toward looking at things on the left because that's the way that we read from left to right. So they weren't actually introspecting. They were coming up with reasons, but they weren't based on anything in particular. The last thing that I want you to remember is that college students emphasize rationality. And the moral of the story comes from this height research that I just covered, in which students were more willing to rationalize why a very disgusting vignette that they listened to was disgusting than the rest of the population. So they tend to think that their responses are based on rationality, when in fact they're feeling that it's disgust because it's based on their gut reaction to it. Yuck, that's disgusting. Nobody should do that. So these are some reasons and some hindrances in our ability to generalize to people. We also have some hindrances, and I'm going to briefly cover this, some hindrances to generalizing to context. And in 2007, Roy Baumeister, a social psychologist, came out with a theoretical paper that said we have a big problem with this as well in social psychology. So he said that we've actually become a science of pen and paper surveys, from thinking about how we feel about things in finger movements, how quickly you push buttons on an implicit association test tells us something about our social psychology. But if you can think back to social psychology, your lectures, we had a really rich field in the 1960s and early 70s where we were putting people into situations and studying how they reacted, studying their behaviors. We were putting people, we were going out into the field and studying people when we changed social contexts, like the sex of the person with whom they were interacting. Uh, this is what got people interested in social psychology. But over the last 5 decades, with the advent of the computer, we've had something called the social cognition movement, where we start to base people's social decision making off of computer models, where we start to study the mind. And Roy Baumeister said this is a problem because we're no longer studying people's behavior. We're studying how people think that they would react in different situations by filling out pen and paper surveys. We're studying how people press buttons on a computer to look at their implicit biases, whether it be for race or a gender bias that they might have. And we're generalizing that to how people actually behave out in the real world. And Roy says that this is a big problem because psychology is the study of behavior. Although we do study mental processes too. Who cares about the mental processes if we can predict what people actually do? So this was a big issue for Roy. Now, I will go ahead and say that there are some times where you don't necessarily want to generalize to a context. You just want to see if something works in the lab. And there is a reading that's not required by MOOC from 1983. You can go ahead and take a look at it, where he argues that sometimes studies are not about that. We just do a study because we want to see if we can demonstrate a phenomenon in the lab. But this was a paper that really motivated me to study actual behavior when I first started in graduate school, and I hope that I've lived up to the motivation. Okay, so what you've seen in this lecture is that we can generalize using our statistics to populations, to people, and we can do that to context, but we have some hindrances to that. Well, we've talked about those hindrances. It's not always the case. It's not always what we're after is generalization, but in this lecture, we really thought to focus on that particular problem. Okay, so we are actually getting back to our roots too. I want to just make sure that that's clear. Our Our social psychologists nowadays seem to be motivated, just like me, by this Baumeister guy, and we're on the right track, I hope. Okay, so next time we're going to be talking about statistics and from a more conceptual standpoint, though, and how that pertains to generalizability.